Okay, so for my TED Talk, I decided I'm going to be talking about Bob Ross. And Bob Ross is really interesting to me because he's someone who has a really weird history of being popular. So he was on this TV show back in the 80s and 90s, and it played every day on like PBS, I think, up until the early 2000s. And he would paint like these awesome, cool nature paintings in like 30 minutes. And I remember going over to my grandparents as a kid and like watching the show, and my grandpa loved to paint. And so my grandpa would be painting along with Bob Ross, and I would sit and watch both of them and just think it was really cool that they could like do this art in such a short amount of time. And then last December I was on Netflix and I was looking through the like recently added folder, and they had put on a bunch of episodes of this spin-off show, which is that Bob made like 3 spin-off shows, I think. So they had put a bunch of episodes of this show on Netflix. And so I watched a couple of them, and then later that day I was looking on Twitter and I realized that I wasn't the only person who was watching these spin-off shows on Netflix. And it's like the same format as Joy of Painting, just a little different. And people were freaking out, like kids my age were freaking out over Bob Ross. And I just thought it was weird how he was so popular back in the 80s and 90s, and then all of a sudden this year he like came out of nowhere and people started watching him again. And so I'm guessing that one of the reasons why he's so popular again is because he's so calming to watch. Like, it's so calming to watch someone paint just these beautiful nature scenes, and it's so satisfying to see like how something transforms. And he has a bunch of little mantras that he says, and the most famous one is happy little trees. So he calls all of the trees that he paints happy little trees, and he like gives them little personalities, and it sounds dumb, but once you watch it, like you're hooked. Like, it's so calming to watch him paint these trees. And then another reason why I think people like him is because he like takes in these animals into his house and takes care of them. And he shows like the animals on his show while he's painting. So he's painting and taking care of these little animals, and it's kind of like a dream life. Like, I feel like a lot of people would like to live like that, and it's not really realistic. So maybe that's why it's so satisfying, is because like, you know, you could never really just take in random animals in your house and like just be an artist and like survive, but he did. So it's really fun to watch someone do that. So I have a couple more pictures. So that's him with a deer, and then this is him with a bird that he took into his house. And then this one is him and his squirrels, and he's kind of like, that's kind of the famous one, is like he's famous for having all these squirrels that he hangs out with, and they'll like go in his pocket and stuff and just like hang out while he paints. It's really like cool. It sounds weird, but you have to watch it. It's really cool. And then this is like an example of something that he would paint on one of his episodes, and he would do these paintings in a half hour flat because that's like the time limit on the show. And the whole time everyone's just wondering like, how did he do that so quick? And it's crazy to see how like a blank canvas totally transforms in a half hour. And then this is a picture of him doing like a mountain and a rainbow scene. And those are kind of like his most common and most famous ones, I feel like, are the ones with like trees and mountains and a cool like sky in the background. He did ones with like waves, and he did snow scenes and cabins and all kind of crazy things, but these are like the most famous. And then this is just an example, I think, of how teens my age are really getting inspiration from Bob Ross, even though he's like an old school guy. So this girl watched an episode of Joy of Painting and then recreated the entire look on her eyelid using makeup. And she said it took her like an hour and a half. I found it on Twitter. And I just think that's crazy too, how like people are getting so inspired by these paintings that Bob Ross did. And it was so long ago, but it just kind of shows you how like history repeats itself. He was so popular a long time ago, and then all of a sudden he just came back, and kids are kind of freaking out. And people who used to watch the show are freaking out too, and thinking that it's really cool that everyone is kind of bonding over Bob Ross. So that's my talk. Thanks.